Please watch this video all the way through before you start the project. Be sure to assemble all the materials and tools that you'll need before you start. Hi, Tom DeWitt here from Tommy D Studios. Today we're going to cover part 2 of the AXN Clouds Fly glider plane construction. And if you'll recall from part 1, we opened the box, looked at all the pieces, parts, raised questions, made observations, and I told you in part 1 that I was going to go off and talk to my friend at the DCRC Flying Club, and I have done that through a series of emails and out at the flying field. These are the materials that you're going to need for the first part of this project. They were all available through Amazon at the time that I did this build. Okay, so let's get started on this project. We're going to start with the tail pieces, the rudder and the elevator, and we're going to use 2 different techniques for each piece. So the rudder will use one technique, the elevator will use another technique. I've assembled the materials that we're going to need here to get these finished off, and our objective is to replace the EPO hinges that are inevitably going to fail eventually with a more durable solution. So we're going to start with the vertical stabilizer and the rudder, and what we're going to do is we're going to take this metal straight edge, we're going to lay it down on the edge of the rudder, and we're going to take this hobby knife and we're going to separate the rudder from the stabilizer, and then we're going to use this sanding block to take down the edges so that they're clean. And then we're going to use these CA hinges, which are available from Great Plains. And we're going to put the hinges down on the surface, mark off where we want the hinges, take the hobby knife, make a slot on each side, insert the hinges, and when we get 2 hinges in here, we're then going to deflect the rudder, leave a space there, and use this CA Thin Instant Foam Safe glue. Put a couple of drops on each side, deflect it the other way, put a couple of drops on each side, and that will be the completion of that portion. For the stabilizer, there's a flush surface here on the top, and the hinge is completely recessed. So what we're going to do is lay the straight edge down on this surface, separate the elevator from the horizontal stabilizer, sand it down, and in this case we're going to use this hinge tape. And this tape is sticky on one side. It looks like regular tape, but it's specially formulated to be durable. And we're going to put the tape down on the surfaces to reattach the elevator to the stabilizer. So I'm going to go ahead and get started on that, and I'll check back with you when I'm done. So here we are back again, and I've completed these tail sections. As you can see, the hinges are in the CA hinges are in the rudder, and it has full deflection. In addition to completing the rudder hinges, I've put the control horn backing piece onto the rudder with a drop of the CA Thin Foam Safe glue. And I've done the elevator with the hinge tape and put the backing piece on for the horn here as well, again gluing it in place. Okay, then you might recall that the wing sections have pre-installed servos, and our next job is to separate the aileron from the wing and put hinge tape on the flat surface on the top of the wing. And in the case of these ailerons, I'm going to leave a little piece of the EPO material at each end, and that will maintain proper spacing and allow for appropriate travel in the aileron rather than trying to guess at it. So I'm going to cut the EPO material out of this hinge, except for a little piece, maybe 3/8 of an inch on either end, and then I'll put the hinge material in between or over the section that's cut away. So now the next step is to install this piece of EPO that fits over the connecting rod, and we need to do that by carefully gluing along these two edges without getting any glue in the channel that the connecting rod, that the reinforcing rod fits in. And I don't know if every kit is the same as this one, but it turns out that on one side of the wing this piece is loose and needs to be glued in. On the other side it appears to have been glued in at the factory. I can't get this similar piece loose from the other wing. So I'll report back to you when that's done, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, we're back again, and as promised I have completed gluing this filler piece in on top of the channel in the wing. Again, the other wing was already glued from the factory, and this wing was not. I don't know why, but that's the way it was. In order to do this job, I utilized this generic foam safe glue that came with the kit, and I put the glue onto a piece of packaging tape that I just put down here on a cutting board, and that allowed me to use a cotton swab to swab up the glue, run it along the edges of the channel very carefully. I did not get it on the servo wire, and I did not get it into the channel where the reinforcement rod goes. So that part is completed, and the next thing that we're going to do is put the yoke on the two halves of the wing and insert that yoke down into the fuselage with the reinforcing rod in between, and then we're going to assemble the two halves of the wing into the fuselage with the rod in place, and then we will put a small piece of the same hinge material between the fuselage and the wing to keep it from separating in flight. So I'll get back. Here's some additional materials that you're going to need for the next part of the project. Okay, so here you can see I have inserted the reinforcement rod between the two wing halves and assembled the wiring yoke. And in order to make this a little bit easier to work on, I've placed the whole assembly on top of two storage containers so that the fuselage can drop down and rest comfortably between the wing halves. I put a dab of hot glue on the connection between the aileron wire and the wiring yoke. Once I push that connector down into the fuselage, I won't be able to reach it any longer. Here the wing assembly is complete with the aileron wiring in place. All that's left now is to add the hinge tape between the fuselage and the wing halves, but we're not going to do that yet. We're going to delay until after we've assembled the electronics and verified that the ailerons are working properly. Here I've dry assembled the tail pieces to make sure that they're true on the horizontal and vertical axes. Use a 1.5 millimeter Allen wrench to loosen the hex nuts that hold the connecting rods at the servos. Push the control horn through the pre-drilled holes in the rudder and through the backing plate that we attached earlier. Press the two pieces together until the control horn is firmly in place. Then slide the control horn over the linkage rod that goes to the servo. Similarly, install the other control horn that's on the elevator and put it over the control rod that goes to the other servo. My friend recommended that something be done to protect the undercarriage of the fuselage. I chose to use this quick roof tape to protect the bottom both at the front and at the rear of the tail section. Before gluing up the tail section, I checked with my friend to be sure that using the center hole on the control horns would allow adequate travel. Here I've set up some shims to hold everything in alignment and laid back the tail pieces, getting ready to glue. I did the same technique as I used earlier, where I put the glue on a piece of packaging tape and then used a cotton swab to swab the glue down into the sections where the tail pieces would mate. After gluing the tail pieces in place, I spent a good bit of time making sure that the horizontal and vertical alignment was just right. Well, I hope you benefited from this build video. That's it for part 2. Come on back for part 3, where we're going to put the electronics and power system together. Bye.